edition of Operation Gladio meets secret societies, although we've kind of moved on temporarily from secret societies to do some background into many of the facets, philosophies, and things like that that have led into secret societies. Hi, we're Hamster. How are you?
I'm great. I like the title you put on this one, History Viewed Through Gladio Glasses. That's great. That's a good one.
Yep.
And today we're going to do some history. And we're going to focus today on the successors to the Dutch Empire, which would be the British Empire, and more specifically, the city of London. It's got all kinds of myths around it, and be prepared for a couple of those, some of those to be slightly debunked today. So, shall we dive in?
Absolutely.
Okay, when we left off, we talked about the rise and fall of the Dutch Republic or the Dutch Empire, which peaked right around the 1680s, 1690s. Small little land of 2 million people somehow developed a modern stock market, a banking system, the publicly traded stock company, and through financial leverage, were the most powerful and wealthiest country in the world. Unfortunately, they had rivals and they fought wars, and wars have the tendency to drain the treasury, and eventually they were surpassed. Became the British Empire, the empire where the sun never sets. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how that happened. All right, so I mentioned this last episode. In England, you had something called the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Also known as the Bloodless Revolution. You are familiar?
Yes.
We should all be more familiar with this, and we're about to be. Did your Rumble go live?
It may be delayed.
Nope, it's going. It's good.
Okay.
I just had to refresh. Okay, so what happens with the Glorious Revolution? Here we have 1688. England is a rising power, but they are not yet the center of the, some say, globalist universe. King James has become the king of England in 1865. King James II. He is Catholic, and England has already gone through the Protestant Reformation. He was actually supported by Protestant majorities in England and Scotland, and of course the Catholics in Ireland supported him. But his policies were insane, and he quickly lost support. He's been in office for 3 years, and people are ticked off. He's putting in a lot of this is religious. What happens is James finally has a son, a guy by the name of James Francis Edward Stuart, and he's born in 1688. And the nobles, and shall we say that at this point we have the merchant princes have already risen. There's some pretty wealthy people. The British East India Company was founded in 1600. So it's been off to a pretty good start. I mean, there's a lot of the shift of power from the nobility to the merchant princes is already well underway, and the people with money are getting bigger and bigger voices. Some of them are buying lordships, etc. But what they're worried about is that now that James has a son, they're worried about having a Catholic dynasty. The time the heir apparent was Mary, and she was Protestant. Mary is born in 1862 and would marry William of Orange in 1677 at the ripe age of 15. Now, it's interesting because at this point in time, the British Empire and the Dutch have been fighting wars on and off over territory and tradings. But you know how you make peace, you marry off your daughter. William is 12 years older than Mary, so he would have been 27 when they married, and his 15-year-old bride. And Mary actually ended up living to the ripe age of 32. She died in 1694, but that's postscript. So William III of Orange is King James's nephew. A little bit of incest going on here, right?
Yes.
Remember we talked about the Dutch having their
pedophilia, incest, whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, checking a few boxes there. So the Dutch are concerned that King James would support France in the 9 Years' War that the Dutch are fighting, and they're very worried about it. So some of James' domestic opponents say, hey, William, why don't you bring an army here to England and overthrow William. And they did. And I'm sorry, overthrow James. So King James pretty much goes into exile in France, and William and Mary ascend to the throne of England. And that's why they call it the Glorious Revolution. So basically, James isn't popular at all, but most of it's religious edicts. He was actually persecuting 7 Protestant bishops, and that's kind of what really triggered it. So there's an invitation. It's sent by some of these British to William. 7 Englishmen signed this invitation, and it's pretty interesting reading. We're not going to go through it, but it's worth looking up. And they basically asked William to use military intervention.
So just to paraphrase, you have a Catholic king that is persecuting the Protestants.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what? I do want to go through this letter, so let me get to it. I'm going to share my screen. Go to the Wikipedia page on the Glorious Revolution. Let's see if we can get to the letter. Should I have this? Okay, here's the invitation to William. It says the success of William's. Okay, here's the signatories. You've got a Henry Sidney, Edward Russell, an Earl of Shrewsbury, the Earl of Devonshire, the Earl of Danby, a Viscount Lumley, and the Bishop Henry Compton, the Bishop of London. So there's the Tories, and you had some Whigs here. So what exactly does the letter say? In a conversation recorded by Gilbert Burnett, he requested a formal invitation asking him to rescue the nation and the religion with the projected date of the end of September. William subsequently claimed that he was forced to take control of the conspiracy when Russell warned him the English would rise against James even without his help, and he feared this would lead to a republic, depriving his wife of her inheritance.
Oh, no. Those dreaded republics.
Yes. And, William is living in a republic. Actually, yeah. William of Orange was not a king. He was, I forget the title, was like a viscount or something like that. But what else do we go with here?
But he's overthrowing the British crown to transfer the crown to his wife so he can be king.
King, yes, very much so.
Okay.
So you got the lay of the land here. But the cool thing is William, he's been living in the Netherlands, and he brings all these great ideas with him. Things like a stock exchange, it's a central bank. In fact, the Bank of England would be founded 6 years later. And we know that kind of where that led us to.
So he's basically just transferring the Dutch Empire to the English Empire.
Yeah, and we talked about how the Dutch, they securitized their entire industry. They stopped producing goods and services, and they're just basically speculating all over the world. It's exactly what Wall Street became. It's the same darn thing. And they've already been investing in the British pounds because it pays bigger interest than the Dutch guilder, and so basically they're subsidizing their own enemies. That's why the Dutch fell. They stretched too thin, and they were financially speculating all over the world.
Which is kind of what you see happening today.
Well, that's why we're telling the story, so we don't repeat it too much.
I know that. I just want to make that crystal clear.
So having England and the Dutch are now allies because of William, and that really improves the military situation against France. You get 2-on-1. French, of course, being Catholic. But war is expensive. So it's by 1712, at the end of the War of Spanish Succession, the Dutch were dead broke, and they let their fleet completely deteriorate. Well, nature abhors a vacuum, so who steps into it? The British Empire, British East India Company, etc. Like I said, William had brought the Dutch ideas like the stock market and banking with him, and these are really revolutionary. And England is going to really obviously became the empire where the sun never set. World trade dominance is completely shifted to Great Britain by 1720. Something really important historically also happened when William and Mary came there. It's called the English Bill of Rights from 1689. And if you read through that, an awful lot of that transferred over to our own Bill of Rights in America. And the Bill of Rights, what happened was Parliament and the Lords, the powers behind it, they said, okay, we've got this new king, but we want to make sure the king, basically has a leash on him. And so we're going to formally declare our rights as free Englishmen. It's an act of Parliament, the Bill of Rights, that changed the succession to the English crown. It is 100% based on the ideas of my hero, John Locke. So everything you're going to hear is it's basically the thoughts of John Locke, who, of course, was the inspiration for many of our founding fathers, but especially Thomas Jefferson. And I've talked about, Locke said, life, liberty, and property.
Right.
That's one of the greatest things ever written. Individual property rights are fundamental to freedom and liberty. If you can own property and the government can't take it from you, you are free. We've sort of lost that to some degree. I'm not going to get into a discussion on property taxes, but I've been doing that all week with my libertarian signal group, and that's a fun one. So what did the Bill of Rights do? It sets out a constitutional requirement that the Crown had to seek the consent of the people as represented in Parliament. It's kind of an important sentence.
Right.
What's the background of this? Well, it all goes back to the Magna Carta of 1215. And back then it was basically the barons wanted to make sure they had rights versus the king. The king allegedly owns everything and the barons get their land. They owe it to the king and therefore they owe their allegiance. Okay. So let's go through that story. Henry II's son, John, was the third born son. And Richard the Lionheart was the first. He inherits the throne. This is the story of Robin Hood. We're going to get into with this pretty accurate history. Richard Lionheart runs off to the Crusades and is gone for years. John, his younger brother, was supposed to not be in England, but he comes back to inherit the throne and was an absolute disaster. This is where the King Arthur story comes in and everything like that. There is no clear set of rules for the financial obligations of the barons or the clergy. The king could finance wars by taking money from the barons. John's nephew, King Arthur, was the heir to the throne. That's an important part of history. That's where the Arthurian legends all came from. And it depends on which one of those you believe. It's a pretty interesting part of English history. But the barons wouldn't support John on the throne unless he granted them their rights in writing. And that's what led to the Magna Carta. And the articles the barons laid out in their demands, they had some clauses. And I'll just go through a few of them. The king and the government were not above the law. It's the first time that had ever been said formally. It placed limits on royal authority. It set England on the path to becoming a constitutional monarchy. What it did not do was give rights to the people. This is about giving rights to the lords. There's a thing called scutage, S-C-U-T-A-G-E. Scutage, I think I'm not sure. It's a medieval taxation. The knights and the nobles, they owed military service to the crown in return for their lands. To avoid service, they could pay the scutage and so the king would go out there and hire mercenaries with the money that the nobles used to basically dodge the draft. Sound familiar?
Yes.
In the Magna Carta, two of the clauses, number 12 and 14, actually set a rate and address the management of how the scutage process works. So they formalized the draft dodging. There's some judicial reforms. King John had used royal discretion to extort money from the barons, effectively taking payment to offer justice. And so they had some clauses in the Magna Carta demanding the due process of the law be applied. That obviously would carry over to our own Bill of Rights, or to the British Bill of Rights and our own. So that was a big deal. There's a bunch in there about the royal forests. Royal forests were used for hunting and resources. That didn't work out too well. That became a big part of British history. People wanting to live in the forest and nobody was there, and they'd be arrested for trespassing in the royal hunting grounds. Let's see. Do we want to go to that? Give me 1 second. Yeah, let's look at the Magna Carta a little closer. I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, are we up there?
Yep.
Okay, a lot of these clauses have expired, but there's 3 here. This section in Wikipedia talks about the clauses remaining in English law. Let's read those. First, we have granted to God, and by this our present charter have confirmed for us and our heirs forever, that the Church of England shall be free, and shall have her whole rights and liberties inviolable. We have granted also and given to all the freemen of our realm, for us and our heirs for ever these liberties underwritten, to have and to hold them and their heirs, to us and our heirs forever. Second part, well, number 9, still there. Remember, this is almost a 1,000-year-old document. The City of London, yes, that's what we're going to talk about today, shall have all the old liberties and customs which it hath been used to have. Moreover, we will grant that all other cities, boroughs, towns, and the barons of the 5 ports and all other ports shall have their liberties and free customs. They specifically singled out the City of London in the Magna Carta as being unique and different, having its own traditions and customs. It's a big deal, and we'll get into that. And title, what is that, 29? No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or be deceased of his freehold or liberties or free customs or be outlawed or exiled or any otherwise destroyed. Nor will we pass upon him nor condemn him, but by lawful judgment of his peers, by the law or by the law of the land. We will sell to no man. We will not deny or defer to any man either justice or right. So those clauses of the Magna Carta are still in effect to this day, including number 2, the City of London. Any comments, questions?
Nope. So they basically created a sovereign city.
Yeah, they acknowledged. Well, yes and no. It's not sovereign, and we're going to get to that because that's part of the myths, is that it is absolutely inviolable on its own. And that's not the case.
Okay.
But we'll get there. That's a great question. Okay. Just going through the history, there was an English Civil War from 1642 to 51. It was between the king and the oligarchic but elected parliament. And that really signifies the birth of political parties. Kind of a big deal. Yeah, King Charles II did what's called the English Restoration for 25 years, from 1860 up until he passed away. And then, of course, that's where we got, we talked about with the Glorious Revolution. Parliament was able to temper some of the excesses with help from the City of London. So the City of London was strong enough that with Parliament, they were actually able to keep the king in check during the 1600s prior to William and Mary. When William takes the throne, Parliament convenes and draws up a statement of the rights and liberties, and that is the English Bill of Rights. Now, that act asserted certain, and this is a direct quote, certain ancient rights and liberties. And I'm going to read through some of them because they're going to sound really familiar to you. The Crown needs the consent of Parliament to suspend laws. The commission for ecclesiastical causes is illegal. Sort of like separation of church and state, huh?
Yeah.
Levying taxes without Parliament's permission is illegal. No taxation without representation. British Bill of Rights talked about the right to petition the king and air their grievances. First Amendment. A standing army without the consent of Parliament became illegal. It's in our Constitution, no standing army. Protestants may keep and bear arms for defense. It's your Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. Also embedded in every state constitution, but only for Protestants, mind you. If you're Catholic, not so much. And you'll notice there's no mention whatsoever of Jews, because apparently they don't run the world yet. People have heard me talk about that. That's one of my favorite myths to debunk. Parliamentary elections ought to be free. Freedom of speech in debates, First Amendment. They had no excessive bail, no cruel and unusual punishments. Jurors in trials for high treason ought to be freeholders. It's jury of your peers. Fines and forfeitures prior to conviction became illegal. And Parliament ought to be held frequently. It's kind of vague. So that really sets the stage for what's going on. That language is there so similar to what we have in our Bill of Rights, and there's a reason for it. Our country is descended from a lot of the best parts of England, and this period of time represents England at its best. So let's talk about the City of London. How many myths have you heard about this one?
Well, you're going to tell us what we've heard is a myth or not.
Yeah. They don't run the world from the City of London. It's also known as the Square Mile because it's about a mile. Let me pull up a couple of maps real quick. I'll let you know when I'm ready to do that. This is not the same as Greater London. The City of London is a square mile. It is a ceremonial county and local authority with its own government, its own police, and as we said, it's got its own ancient privileges. So what's the history of that? Okay, I'll pull that up. Oops. Almost left the studio on accident again. There we go. Okay, the City of London. It's this little area right there, right on the River Thames, and it's a very wide river. It's really good for commerce. Nice deep ports and everything like that. So it's a natural place of center of commerce. The Roman settlement, we called it Londinium, in about 45 AD. Population got to about 50,000 people living in the square mile, and that's most of what was London at the time. It was a trading post and a bridgehead on the banks of the River Thames. Quickly became a commercial and administrative capital of Roman Britain. The Romans would build a London Wall around 200 AD, which still roughly defines the city. And you can see that on this little map. After the Roman withdrawal in the 5th century led to a big decline, then the Saxons and the Vikings came and kind of reestablished it as a trading hub. We can take that down now. Where are we? Okay, so then we get to the medieval period. The city's got its own charters, they've got guilds, and an elected government. William the Conqueror in 1066 doesn't invade the City of London. It invades the rest of England, but not the City of London. Instead, William the Conqueror grants it special privileges to secure its loyalty. Successive kings would reaffirm these rights in exchange for loans and taxes. So it's already being treated separately. So some of the myths around the City of London are based on some real truth. It's always had a carve-out. And the City of London, of course, played a key role in events like the signing of the Magna Carta and later on what's called the Peasants' Revolt, which I'm not going to go into. But the Peasants' Revolt's exactly what it sounds like. And again, London becomes a center of trade, finance, and ceremony. By about 1530, the population had grown back to about 50,000, but by 1605, the population had exploded to 225,000 people. And you're getting suburbs outside of just this one square mile, obviously. As I said, the British East India Company is founded in 1600. This is really unique because they're the first private company that was granted the right to mint coin. And they did that because the British ships would go off to India, where silver was basically you go out there, buy silver in India, come back, and it's worth twice as much. It was a real easy trade because the exchange rates were off. We can go into more detail about that another time. By 1694, the Bank of England is founded. And it is now the second oldest continuous central bank. Any guesses what the oldest is?
Didn't you tell us last time?
Well, it's continuous. The Bank of Amsterdam folded, went defunct. So the only one that's still continuous would be Sweden from 1668.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Fortunes are made. Countries are indebted. And this is what they're doing with the bank. They've realized that debt is more powerful than armies. And as you've talked about many times, they're financing both sides of many wars by this time. And debt was far and away their greatest weapon. The City of London is financing and ensuring trade all over the world.
That's the insurance part of it is a big deal.
Yes. Yeah. You've talked about Lloyd's of London.
Yes.
Where's I going to go here? Okay. Let's take a look at the empire where the sun never sets. Sorry, everybody. I'm a little slow. My mouse ran out of battery, so I'm working off the trackpad, and I'm really terrible at it. So I'm trying not to screw up. And there we go. That is a map of the British Empire at its peak, I believe. And you can see about half the world is dotted red. And most of this is done with debt and insurance. And why is insurance such a big deal? Well, you're going to set out cargo halfway around the world. And that's a very big financial undertaking. You've pooled your capital because you have stock markets, but you want to make sure, what are the odds of this coming back? Well, it's basically legalized gambling is what the insurance was. And the ship owners wanted to hedge their risk, and other people could bet on it. And it became a very lucrative market. Similar to our stock market futures and options, and we all know that came from Amsterdam. Okay. There's something that comes into existence called the City of London Corporation. And that's where a lot of these myths come from. So exactly what is that? London today has 33 boroughs, and the City of London is one of the 33, but it's got its own special privileges. The City of London Corporation provides services for the residents and city business in the square mile. It is considered the oldest and continuous elected democracy in the world, and it predates Parliament by more than a century. The city, as it's known, was incorporated in 1141, and that's what I want to talk about, incorporation. You've heard people talk about the U.S. corporation, that it's incorporated. That is a myth. You can go to my channel, look up 1871 corporation, and you can find a couple of videos where we went through that in a whole lot of detail. I'll go high level today, but the United States was not a corporation, just like London is not a corporation like IBM or something like that. You incorporate cities everywhere. Wherever town you live in, I can almost guarantee you it is incorporated. That's what that means. In 1871, they incorporated Washington, D.C. Everyone thinks that means the U.S. became incorporated. The myth, of course, that you hear all the time is that the United States went bankrupt after the Civil War, and they're broke. So the City of London and the Vatican Bank, were their big lenders for the Civil War, and they basically incorporated America, and they've been running us ever since 1871. You've heard this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some major problems with that. First of all, the Union, didn't borrow money from Europe for the Civil War. Lincoln sent Samuel Chase to borrow money, and they wanted like 35% interest. So Samuel P. Chase turns around and just says, okay, we'll just create fiat currency called the greenback and issue a bunch of bonds and borrow from our own citizenry. They never borrowed money from Europe ever for the Civil War. The interest was too high. Second, Colonel, when was the Vatican Bank formed?
Oh, I don't remember that off the top of my head.
1944, I think, or 45.
So, yeah. So, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So tell me, if it wasn't in existence in 1871, how did it lend money to the Union? And how did they incorporate the United States government? The answer is it didn't happen. That's one of the biggest myths on the internet, people. I highly, highly recommend you watch that video that we did. And the first person I did that video with was Coach Melody Jennings. And Colonel, you may end up meeting her in San Diego. So I believe she is going to make that trip as well.
Oh, cool.
But she wrote a book on that. I may have that around here, not it's up on the bookshelf. But she wrote a book on this myth, the 1871 Corporation, and she's correct on it. Anyways,
1942. I was thinking it was at the beginning of the war. It's 1942.
Thank you. But again, 1942 comes after 1871, right?
It does.
Okay. So that myth is gone. We are not run by the Vatican Bank, but we'll talk about whether the City of London has too much influence of us. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay, so the City of London, the square mile, is incorporated in 1141. It's got its own sheriff, can elect its own mayor, and it's got a corporate structure, even to this day, where you've got this Lord Mayor. That's what his title is. He's the Lord Mayor. And City of London is really old boys network. This is cronyism at its best. These are basically the wealthiest financiers, all of them sitting in this one little square mile, and they elect their own, whoever their head honcho is going to be the Lord Mayor. But you guarantee that'd be like being the head of Goldman Sachs or something like that. They have a court of aldermen, a court of common council, and of course the freemen and livery of the city. The freedom of the City of London. Yeah, we need to get to that. I'm going to share that screen. First of all, what's a livery company? It's from it's derived from medieval guilds. They became trading companies. There's about 110 livery companies still in existence in England. It's basically a license to import or export certain products, what have you. It's ancient and ritualistic. A lot of these, they talk in Old English, but one thing they're not is lizards. Yeah, let's jump to the website. Actually, Colonel, I just realized I did something really silly. My battery on this laptop is going pretty low. I think I can make it through, but I may have to do a 2-minute excursion to go get the charger. So if that happens, entertain our audience for me. But I'm just warning you in advance that might happen.
Okay.
All right, so let me share this screen. This is fun. The secretive City of London is so secretive that they have everything on their website. Welcome. What do you want to do? Well, let's learn about the City of London. About the London Corporation. They get the organizational structure I just talked about. Our role in London. City of London forms part of London as a whole, along with the 32 London boroughs who have responsibility for local government. London covers the major London, the Greater London Authority, etc. This is what it looks like. And the City of London is the square mile, which is right here. Hey, there we go. It says, based in Guildhall, the City Corporation looks after and promotes the City of London. It is headed by the Lord Mayor, has an independent police force, all that stuff we talked about. It's a really fascinating website. I wanted to access to information. Is that what I want? Freedom of Information Act? No. So there are, you can see from their website, it's got data protection policy. It's run like any other corporation. It's not the insidious evil hydra you think it is. That being said, we know that London and these financiers have been on both sides of every war for hundreds of years. But are they doing it for nefarious purposes? Do they still control the United States? To some degree.
Let me just add this. I don't think the control that people are looking for is on websites. They're in the first half of what we have been talking about through the Pilgrim Society, the Royal Institute like Chatham House and CFR. These people are not the type of people that leave things to happenstance, but they're also not going to do it through these formal structures. And so the does that make sense? I think people are looking for a wiring diagram of how that control, and they go to these corporations or these incorporations of entities, which, to your point, my local city is incorporated for that purpose. That's not how they do it. If you go to your local level, you understand that there are families that have lived here for eons. Like in my hometown is the hometown of Publix. They exert a lot of control over our local city, but they're not sitting on the city council. They're people that they fund the campaigns for are, and that's a very different structure that people are looking for, and you're not going to find that on an organizational chart.
Yeah, it's a loose web, yeah, and a lot of these companies, all these different banks and insurance houses, stuff like that, they're competing with each other. At the same time, they're electing their own Lord Mayor, who sits, one to rule over them all, but he doesn't have that much power. It is not a giant conspiracy that they're all working together to enact some, City of London-based globalist world order. Yet they are working with the same people. They are the financiers for the people that do want to implement the world order.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily busting the myth, but let's bring it to reality and say, this is how it actually works. This is how high finance works. Okay. Let's talk about some of the myths. The City of London is not its own sovereign state. It is fully a part of the United Kingdom and England. Parliament and the courts still apply in the City of London. It is subject to national taxation, criminal law, and foreign policy. Its quasi-independent reputation stems from historical privileges and charters, not sovereignty. So it's given extra privileges, but it still has to ask for permission for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
it is not, that's a big deal that it's not a sovereign state. That's one of the ones you hear all the time. That, the king, well, we'll get to that. It is not a lawless plutocracy where businesses run everything. It's got a unique voting system for local elections. And it's unique. Okay, so you got 11,000 residents approximately. They each get a vote. But businesses also get a vote. And it's weighted by total employees. So like for every 2 employees, a business gets a vote. So the people vote and the corporations vote. So pretty much the exact same thing we have in America, only they admit it.
But the corporations have a weighted vote.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And I think it's only the employees that work in the City of London.
Correct.
So, yeah. And now this is a holdover from medieval times, and it reflects the city's role as a business district, not a residential one. And that's really important. We start talking about the Corporation of D.C., which is a big deal, and the internet, stuff like that. Washington, D.C. was incorporated. It was never supposed to have people living there when Washington, D.C. was founded during the Washington administration. They were never supposed to. And what happened, because it's stuck right, Washington, D.C. is right between Maryland and Virginia. It was from Lake Land. Well, runaway slaves coming through the South would get to D.C. where they could be free. And the politicians in D.C. say, hey, this is great. We get some free labor. And that's how D.C. started to get residents, because it was pretty long to commute to, from a free state. Because remember, Maryland and Virginia had to deal with the fugitive slave laws. Well, that's very similar to what the City of London's got. So, anyways, interesting historical parallel, right?
Yeah.
Next myth. It does not secretly control global finance or the British government, nor is it run by Jews. Okay, City of London is not. you talk about the Rothschilds. During the 1800s, the Rothschilds were the wealthiest bank in England. That is no longer the case. You had about five major banking houses. You had there were competitors with the Rothschilds, but we're talking about a 300-year-plus history here. Different houses rise and fall. And the Rothschilds, the Jewish house, was at one point in time the most powerful British bank. It is no longer, and I'm going to tell you why that happened. Well, a couple of reasons. One is that with we've talked about this over and over again. Any of these incredibly wealthy families, the first generation builds it, the second starts to squander it. By the third generation, it's usually gone. And that happens time and time and time throughout history. The other thing is that they get diluted through inheritance. And the Rothschilds, once you get to about 3 or 4 generations deep, they started out with 5 brothers and 5 Rothschild banks and 5 European capitals. You had world wars ended a few of those houses. Basically only the French and the English Rothschild house still live, and they've been, basically been diluted quite a bit. So now we basically only have one major Rothschild bank that's important. That's the one that's associated with Epstein. And even that, doesn't rank in the top 50 wealthiest financial institutions in the world. It got diluted with inheritance over generations. It happens. That's why corporations last longer, because they don't rely on bloodlines. So some of the other major banking houses were, of course, very famous, the Baring Brothers, which was co-founded in 1762. Ambrose Bank, Kleinwort & Sons, Schroders, Lazard Brothers, Morgan Grenfell. These are all the City of London great banking insurance houses, Lloyd's of London. How many of those names are Jewish?
One.
The Rothschilds.
Yeah, Schroeder Bank is a very interesting history as well.
Yeah, you want to talk on that? I don't know too much. I don't have anything special about that. I mean, I was aware of them, and I don't think I've ever done business with them. But
just from the perspective that they played a very important role in World War II with the ties that they had into Germany. That's one of the banks that comes up often in financing both sides of wars. And again, they're not Jewish.
No. And of course, this is a mostly true story. Is during the Napoleonic Wars, I think it was Meyer Amscher Rothschild. No, this would have been Nathaniel Rothschild, I believe, was running the bank, the London branch at the time. But you double check me on that. Basically, they had a rider overlooking the Battle of Waterloo, and when they realized that what's his name that beat Napoleon? Come on, we know that. Oh, shoot, how do I forget that name? Cornwall. Was it Cornwall? Nah. Anyway, Rothschild had a rider. He sprints to London, and then he gets there, and the Rothschilds start selling everything. And everyone thinks, oh, Napoleon must have won the war. Must have won at Waterloo. And everyone else starts panic selling. And then the Rothschilds turn around and start buying up everything on the cheap. And that the myth is that they ended up owning the entire stock market. The reality is they went from about the third biggest bank to probably the largest in asset holdings, and that would ebb and flow, over the years with the Baring Brothers. And of course, the rest of the Rothschild houses were always lending money to governments to fight wars, and that was a very, very good business because debt, countries rise and fall, rulers come and go, but the debt always remains, and the debt always gets paid.
He was defeated by the Duke of Wellington.
That's it. I was trying to get there. Thank you. All right, so the Baring Brothers have a really interesting story. Have you ever heard of the 1890 Baring crisis?
I have.
It's interesting because it set the stage for something we're living with today. In the 1880s, Argentina is going through a huge speculative boom, and of course, it's fueled by British capital inflows. We're lending money left and right. And what happens when you borrow super fast and borrow all this money to build too fast? To build your infrastructure, what happens? Eventually it collapses. We've seen it happen dozens of times. Where the Baring Brothers were deeply involved in that debt, Argentina had political instability, inflation, one bad harvest, and it triggered a huge debt crisis. And Argentina says, oops, we're going to stop paying our debt. And we suspended our debt payments. Happens a lot, people. Governments do default on their loans. Well, Baring had funded his position with a bunch of short-term notes from the other banks, and they realized what's going on. They say, you know what, we're not going to roll over your loans anymore. So now Barings sitting there and says, I've got no liquidity. I am now insolvent. And that's a problem because it gets contagious. Sound familiar?
Yes.
It's exactly what the financial crisis of 2008 was. But what happens is the Bank of England intercedes, and it gets the other banks around and it has them pool their money, about 18 million pounds. And the Bank of England itself puts in 8 million pounds, and it stabilizes the Baring Bank. Too big to fail. First time that ever happened. And what they did is they set up the good bank and the bad bank restructuring. So all the bad debt got spun off, and the good stuff got to go back into business. So they split their balance sheet, and nobody ever had to pay the price for their bad investment decisions, just like the 2009 financial crisis.
Yes.
But that's not the only time it happened. We're going to get to that. But what it did is it contained the crisis, prevented systemic shock. Argentina would end up losing about 11% of its GDP. Recession spread to the rest of Latin America. And we know what's been going on in Latin America ever since. This is 1890. Now, what's America doing in Latin America right around that time? What are we starting to do?
We're starting to invade.
Uh-huh. And of course, the British banks aren't going to be financing us, are they? So it's going to be financed by the Wall Street banks, following this British business model. One of the great things we got from our English cousins, huh? This directly leads to the panic of 1907 that you hear me pounding the table on. What's panic of 1907? One of the trusts in America was the Knickerbocker Trust. People started shorting their stock, and their stock looks like it's going to be insolvent. Everyone panics, and everyone's worried that all of Wall Street is going to be run on all the banks. J.P. Morgan steps in, gets all the other bankers together, said, "Look, we got to keep this from happening. We're going to prop up the banking system. We're going to be the lender of last resort," and basically they became the central bank. Well, 4 years later, these same bankers meet on Jekyll Island and create the Federal Reserve. But it was the panic of 1907, what they learned from the previous Baring Brothers crisis, is exactly what the Federal Reserve model was built on. And that's why we got the Federal Reserve. Thank you, England, so much for that, you bastards. I've gone into more detail on the panic of 1907, but that really was the first American central bank. It was J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, of course, would then be the lender to everything in England during the World War I when we were doing the Lend-Lease program. They got a commission on every single American product got sent to England. And people don't talk enough about J.P. Morgan. Everyone says, "Oh, J.P. Morgan was a Rothschild puppet." He was 10 times bigger at the time. J.P. Morgan was gigantic comparatively. And if the Rothschilds had so much money, how come England had to borrow from J.P. Morgan? England was bankrupt. The Rothschilds had already began their fall. They didn't fall completely, but they were well past their peak when that happened. So sorry about busting your myths on the Rothschilds, people, but by the late 19th century, there's a rise of 5 big clearing banks. So what happens is the big 5 clearing banks for mass retail banking replace the merchant banks. So the Rothschilds house, the Barings, people like that, these are what you call merchant banks. They're financing trade around the world. They're financing, wars and stuff like that. Well, by the late 19th century, we've got a rising middle class, and they are putting their money in retail banks, and the retail banks end up with more deposits than the merchant banks. And in America, we basically had the Glass-Steagall Act, which kept the two separate. And when we decided we were going to deregulate in the 90s and let the merchant banks, the investment banks, and the retail banks combine, that led us to our financial crisis. So thank you for deregulation, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Bush. Happened under your watch. And it was bipartisan. But it's a really important part in history to realize that the retail banks became much bigger. That would have been your city banks, your Bank of America. Those would be retail banks, as opposed to your trading banks, which would be a Goldman Sachs.
And that's critical to understand. And I don't think that's talked about near enough. Because if you're the Wall Street bankers and you're primarily merchant banks, and you have growing up around you all of these retail banks, and you're looking over the fence going, I want some of that. You can understand that the political pressure that the merchant banks, because these are the old families, the retail banks are basically the new blood, right?
Yeah, very much so. That's a really, really good analogy right there. And of course, they do work as a cartel. I mean, they try to stifle competition. They own the regulation, the regulators, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's where you get into the secret society piece of this, because you have these informal um, oligarchs over this entire operation. And it's like with every cartel, you look over and you see what they have and you want some of that. So you have the secret society people placed in the Federal Reserve, the SEC, the political positions, where the new guys, they don't have as much political power, even though they have now grown up financially, kind of, overshadowing some of these merchant banks. These merchant banks still have all of the people in the right place in order to orchestrate this cartel of basically controlling their people that they have embedded in the government structures, that then allow, oh, well, look, we can just merge these things and we can kind of spread our wings out and infiltrate the competition so that we have now broadened our tent of control.
Yeah, very much so. I don't want to get into the Bank of International Settlements and the World Bank, but that's the umbrella even above that.
Correct.
And they do operate as a cartel system. But the myth I want to bust is that, the City of London, runs the world, and the Rothschilds run the City of London, and it's clear that it's a consortium of competing interests that they will fight each other over business, but in terms of how it comes to regulate and the structure, they work together.
Correct.
And the City of London is one of many places that happens, and it does have special privileges. So what's the reality today of the City of London?
I think the thing that gives the some gas to put on that fuel is if you go back and you put up that slide of the British Empire, their banking control doesn't rest just inside the City of London. It rests in the HSBC that was set up in Hong Kong. They have a broad reaching set of, because of the empire that they have. So that's another aspect of this. And again, it lessens the Jewish controls all of the finance thing, because it is a very big umbrella when you look at it.
Mm-hmm. It's I like the octopus analogy to really understand the global financial system. And that reminds me I've read this quote to you before, but about Goldman Sachs being the giant vampire squid with its blood funnel sucked in the throat of humanity, trying to suck dry everything that smells like money.
That's a good analogy.
Well, that's from Matt Taibbi when during the financial crisis in 2009, he wrote that about Goldman Sachs. And I should play this. I'll pull the quote up next time. In fact, you know what? Let me just grab that right now, because that's worth it.
Yeah, it is. It definitely describes, and that's why I think what we are trying to do is to get people to think much bigger than what they have been shoved into. There's a reason why people want you to believe this line of thinking, when actually the picture is much broader and it's a lot more nuanced. And when you understand how the tentacles of the octopus work, you realize that while this is a cartel happening here, you have what Ian Burlingham calls the high table. And they set this up this way with the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, the World Bank, that there are bigger and bigger entities that are set up to basically manipulate all of us. And if we would stop being put into these boxes and look at the actual big picture, it's easier for us to see who the real enemy is. And that's what they want you not to be able to see. They want you to focus all of your ire on one particular group, one particular country, when it's a much broader story.
All right, I found the quote. This is from Matt Taibbi, writing for the Rolling Stone, and an article in 2010 called "The Great American Bubble Machine." And the opening paragraph to me is this is a literary masterpiece. I've read this, been reading it for 16 years since that came out. And it goes like this. He says, "The first thing you need to know about Goldman Sachs is that it's everywhere. The world's most powerful investment bank is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money." You could apply that to some of these City of London banks. You can apply that to other Wall Street banks, but he's going after Goldman Sachs. Let me just says, in fact, in the history of the recent financial crisis, which doubles as a history of the rapid decline and fall of the suddenly swindled dry American empire, reads like a who's who of Goldman Sachs graduates. And it's exactly what you're talking about having people in these control areas, all the regulators. We talked early on about the Export-Import Bank with some of our Skull and Bones members.
Yes.
That's regulating these people that are in the commercial banks. It's exactly what that's all about.
Yes. And that's why I think the sequence that you have provided this information throughout this entire series is critically important for people to understand these informal networks. We just picked a couple. There's many more. But you go into depth and the hereditary nature of them, because they all spawn more evil squids.
All right, let's wrap up City of London. Corporation provides local services. It owns significant property and investments. It's a very wealthy incorporated city. The mayor of London, which is Sadiq Khan or whatever his name is, actually, and the Greater London Authority handle most strategic issues for the wider metropolis, but the city still retains its ancient autonomy in local matters. Interesting custom. When the Queen of England, now the King, goes to visit the City of London, he has to wait at the border to be ushered in. He cannot cross into the city. The King or Queen cannot cross into the City of London. When a king or queen meets with the City of London alderman, the queen cannot sit at a higher level than the alderman. They have to be at the same level. That's all true. So we understand that it is a unique city, but is it this mythical center of the universe? Well, let's find out. So I'll do one last screen share. I think this is fun. Okay, this is the Global Financial Center Index. I forget who puts this together, but they're very, very proud of themselves. They've got New York City ranked number 1, London number 2, Hong Kong 3, Singapore 4, San Francisco 5. It's interesting. Paris is all the way down here at 19. You find for Europe, you got London, and then not another one until you get to Zurich at 11. And you get some Frankfurt, Luxembourg, Geneva, Paris, and of course Amsterdam still hanging in there, tiny little Dutch. But you also see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 North American cities are the financial centers, the usual suspects, Boston, Chicago down there at the bottom. DC is ranked 17th. And how many Asias do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 Asia Pacific, led of course by Hong Kong. So I bring this up to say we may be ruled by these financial elites, but it's not just Wall Street. It's not just City of London. It sure the heck isn't the Vatican Bank. It's these banking system that spread all over the world. And this is the giant octopus. And they're the ones who give the orders to the intelligence agencies and say, these are the people that need to be toppled. That's your hierarchy right there.
Yep. And to me, Washington, D.C. should be nowhere on there.
And it didn't used to be. And I agree with you 100%. It did not. 20 years ago, it would not have made the list.
Yeah.
That's how much it's shifted.
And the one that I find most interesting on there is Luxembourg. Because, of course, Luxembourg is the city of the nefarious banking. Every entity that has been part of Operation Gladio has banking in Luxembourg for illicit arms, illicit drugs, the proprietary companies that the CIA likes to, like the whole Iran-Contra, had both Swiss and Luxembourg entities in it. BCCI was registered in Luxembourg. And so I just find that very interesting that they're in the top 20. That should scare the hell out of everybody.
Well, think about this. They're ahead of Beijing. Beijing's at 22. Luxembourg's ahead of them.
Yeah.
They're ahead of Toronto. Toronto's down at 29. Melbourne will start
everybody.
Yeah. It's interesting some of the things they're ahead of. If you go down the list further, you actually see the Isle of Jersey, which is a huge money laundering center.
Where's it at on the list?
That's number 38. But I think the population of Jersey's got what is like 10,000 people.
It is almost no one lives there.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's tiny. And it's fascinating.
But it is a hot spot. As a matter of fact, you find that all of the people that were associated with the savings and loans collapse in 1980, 80s and early 90s, that they all set up family trust in the Isle of Jersey.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done some business through there with some of our offshore trades. We had some international clients, and it makes a lot of sense for British to offshore their accounts there.
It makes no sense for Americans unless they're money laundering.
Well, the Cayman Islands is closer anyway.
Yeah. Well, they definitely use them, but yeah, the Isle of Jersey is very interesting.
Yes, it is. So is Cyprus, which is where what was his name?
Ukraine.
Yeah, Ihan Kolomoisky, Zelensky's former sponsor, had laundered all his money through Cyprus, and now he owns half the skyline in Cleveland, Ohio, and 40% of the skyline in Louisville, Kentucky. Even though Kolomoisky himself can't set foot in America, he owns portions of major cities here.
He does. And Cyprus is one of those countries where for $1 million, you can basically buy citizenship.
Some other names on that list. You got Isle of Man, Malta, Bermuda, Guernsey. You know all about Bermuda, but all of these are money, international money laundering.
Yeah, Malta is a big one.
Yeah. Hey, San Diego at 53, my old hometown. That's a fun list. Anyways, that's the presentation for today, and I thought it'd be good to set the stage here because that's going to lead us into what we want to really get into is the Fabian socialists.
Yes. Is that going to be next week?
What's that?
Are we talking about the Fabians next week?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do some of the philosophers that led to the Fabians, and then we'll start with the Fabians. The Fabians is going to take a few weeks, I think. I
think so too.
Yeah, I mean, we got to go through the entire role of we got to go through the London School of Economics. We got to go through, Rhodes Scholars. All this. We've got some long lists to get through, but they're going to keep hammering our point home, and I think that's what we do. We keep smashing it until enough people.
So we're all educated the right way and not with the myths.
All wars are banker wars.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for doing all of that homework, Brady, and educating all of us. I appreciate it.
I enjoy it, but it's also always a pleasure to present it with you.
Yes. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.